afternoon. What a great crowd. So my name is Skye Patrick, as you've heard, and I am the director of the LA County Library System. Thank you. Thank you. I feel obligated to share with you that there are two major library systems. There are lots of library systems in LA County. There's the city library and the county library. So I am the county library, nearly everything outside of the city. So just to orient you. Then I have my colleagues here. We have Nick Higgins from Brooklyn Public Library, who is their chief librarian.
Good to be here.
And then we have the director of San Diego Public Library, Misty Jones. And we're just going to have a conversation about book banning and censorship, essentially, and why we're all here. So apparently, there's quite a few of you who are interested in this topic. So hopefully, we'll have some time to answer questions at the end. So with that, Nick, do you want to give just a little bit of background of who you are?
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That
You
was
weren't
Misty.
paying attention, now you are.
A little bit about who I am.
Who you are.
I'm Nick Higgins. I'm the chief librarian at Brooklyn Public Library. So I've been working in public libraries in New York City for about 18 years. Started out as a librarian trainee, so worked my way up from basically like trying to learn everything I could about library services by just jumping in and doing it. And I moved over to New York Public Library for a little while. I ran their jail and prison library program. Tried to cut my teeth on as much as I could about like what libraries mean for the community. And I'm blessed to live in Brooklyn, where every neighborhood kind of expresses itself differently, has its own set of needs. So I felt like, being a librarian and having 61 sites to go out to different neighborhood libraries, I could find out sort of like the richness and the vast diversity of Brooklyn just by working in public service in Brooklyn. So now I run those libraries, so I oversee all the program services and collections that we have for the 2.7 million people of Brooklyn. But great to see such a big library audience, the library lovers here in the room, so thank you so much.
And 62 locations?
Yeah, 62.
I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I have a little frog in my throat. Misty Jones. Yes, of course, always. Misty Jones, and I'm not really crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I have a frog in my throat. Misty Jones, thank you so much. I love these people. I am the director for San Diego Public Library. So a little like Skye, there's two systems in San Diego. There's a county system and a city system. And I am in the city. So everything within the city limits of San Diego, all the way to the border of Mexico, Tijuana. And I've been in San Diego for 12 years. Came from Charleston, South Carolina. So not originally, I'm originally from Alabama. Or as I like to say, I'm from LA, Lower Alabama. If you can't tell from my accent that I'm not from California. But I came in, we have a brand new, or it's 10 years old now, but we had a new library in San Diego, and I came to open that central library downtown. 2 years later, became the director. Feel very humbled and privileged to get to do what I do every day. It's, it's one of those where when I went to library school, I never intended to be a public librarian. I was going to work in a museum or academic library.
Yeah, me too.
And then I started working in the public library and was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is my calling. And so really, really love it. When you love what you do, you don't work a day, right, they say. So, which is not true, but
That's not true. You work your tail off.
7
Yeah.
days.
yeah.
So just for those of you who are not part of sort of library land, when we say library school, we mean a master's program, and in some cases a PhD program. It's this sort of like local vernacular and nomenclature to call it library school. And so I'm Skye Patrick, I've mentioned before. I am LA County Library Director. I've been in my position for 8 years. In fact, 8 years to the day. Today is my anniversary.
No,
Congratulations.
Nick and I know each other from the East Coast. I worked in East Coast libraries and the Queens Library. I was working in Florida as the director, San Francisco. I've kind of been all over the place. Baltimore. And originally I was supposed to interview Dr. Carla Hayden today, who is our Librarian of Congress, and unfortunately she couldn't be here. However, this is such a fantastic panel, and I'm so thrilled to be able to kind of center this conversation with my colleagues who are partially responsible, actually Nick was the first, to really have a library response to the current issue of book banning. For those of you who are in the library, we know that I see you all back there. We know that banning books and censorship, this has happened historically in different times in library systems, but for those of you who are not aware, this may feel like an assault in a lot of ways about for literature and for reading and those who like to read. So we're going to talk about a little bit about a program we have called Books Unbanned. And I wanted to open it up with Nick. Can you kind of give us a sort of the ground, lay the ground of how your program started? Because it started in Brooklyn.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So Books Unbanned, we're here to talk about book bans and how a library response and how we can provide just really meaningful interventions for people, particularly young people who are facing the brunt of book bans across the United States. So Books Unbanned is a freedom to read initiative that we started in Brooklyn, but now we have other partners. So Boston, San Diego Public Library, LA County, and Seattle Public Library have joined the effort. It's, again, a freedom to read initiative that basically allows any young person in the United States, age 13 to 21, full access to our digital library collection. So in Brooklyn, we have over 500,000 ebooks and audiobooks available for young people. And the only thing that a young person needs to do to participate in the program is to send us an email, DM. I'm a little older, so I'm not really sure exactly what that means on social media, but we get those messages, right? So there's a lot to learn. But we get those messages, and all they really have to do is just tell us sort of like kind of local censorship efforts that they're dealing with in their communities, any book challenges, any access issues. They might be living in a rural community. They can't get to a public library. It might be 50 miles away, and they can't drive. And what we'll do, we'll issue them a digital library card, and they'll automatically get full access to our collection. And they can read banned books for sure, absolutely. But the point is that they can read whatever they want. Freedom to read is freedom to read whatever you want. So there's the two-pronged approach really with Books Unbanned. One, it's an effort to nullify local censorship efforts in broadly across the country. And two, it's actually a way to model what a public library should and can be. So you have unfettered access to whatever you want to read. This is a right. You certainly can read whatever you want. We are impartial to what you want to read, and we're happy to provide that service. So, I mean, what really motivated us to start the program is that, as Skye mentioned, I mean, there was a proliferation of book bans, more than we've ever seen before. And we started paying attention about 2021 or so. And what struck us, not the volume of book challenges and book bans was certainly disheartening enough, but it seemed a little bit different this time. I mean, we understood it to be simply because the books that were oftentimes challenged, first of all, they were for young adults. Oftentimes the battleground of these sort of book bans and challenges are in schools, and they're in libraries and sort of like young adult sections. And the books that were being targeted first, like primarily, were books by or about people of color or LGBTQ plus individuals. And that said to us that this was like the books, pulling books off the shelf was really just a proxy for something a little bit more urgent that was happening underneath. And we interpreted that as a sort of a movement to make sure that some people in our communities don't their experiences don't matter, that their narratives don't have sort of access to the public discourse. And that was very pernicious, it just seemed very pernicious to us, and we wanted to act. And so we decided to spin up this program where, again, we had three goals. One, to allow anyone in the country age 13 to 21, access to our full collection, so we could intervene on their behalf if they were facing local book challenges. And a second goal was to really center teens in this story. We created these intellectual freedom councils of teens who were meeting like once a month online, and it started in Brooklyn with a group of teens who helped us come up with the name Books Unbanned and all that. They were active in our library. And then we started inviting other teens from places like Texas and Louisiana and Alabama and other places across the country. So now every month these young people get together and they're telling stories about what they're seeing on the ground level in their communities. And they're learning about intellectual freedom. We invite guests, First Amendment scholars and advocates to come and talk to these young people. And for us, that's really Like, it's really about young people and making sure that they are given the tools to become the next generation of library advocates and community leaders, and just making sure that they understand that they're not alone in this effort, and they have responsible adults around them to support them and give them some sort of outlet for their advocacy.
And so of the 5 libraries that Nick mentioned, there's really 3 models. There's the model that Brooklyn, Seattle, and Boston has implemented, essentially, where they open up their entire digital collection to the entire United States. And we'll talk about the funding part of that in a little bit. Then there's a model that Misty has implemented where she and her foundation are really opening up a very selective group of books, primarily books that are being banned, but for the United States. And then you have our model where we have opened up our entire digital collection, but only for the state of California. There's a lot of reasons why we've all chosen to do it a little bit differently, and we can talk about that a little bit later. So I wanted to just make sure you understood that there are different kinds of ways that libraries are speaking about and answering the call to this huge issue that's happening. So with that, Misty, I wanted to just ask you to talk a little bit about how your foundation, your supporters, and for some of you here, I think you're termed angels. How have your angels or supporters really stepped up and pushed this agenda at San Diego Public?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So our foundation actually learned about this from Seattle Public Library at a conference, a fundraising conference in Austin, and came back to me with the idea I really wanted to get involved. But it started because of someone who decided to take it upon themselves to remove an entire Pride collection from one of our libraries during Pride Month. This was a customer, a user.
Okay.
We had a Pride collection in one of our, and during Pride Month that all of our libraries have, and we've had for years, for 10 years we've had this.
Some of us several decades.
Yes. This year, decided to check out all of the books and email me and say, I'm checking out the books and I'm not going to return them until you decide not to put them back in the collection. And so, which was a first for me. I've had several people complain about drag queen story times or, different things, but I've never had anyone decimate an entire collection. And so I responded and wrote back which I thought was a very eloquent, nice email response, explaining that, the library is where everyone should see themselves, and intellectual freedom, and that, yes, absolutely, you have the right to choose what it is that you want your children to read, but you don't have the right to choose that for someone else. And I sent it to my mayor's office and my council office just as a heads up, and my council office, unbeknownst to me, sent it to the paper, sent the email to the paper, and it got published. We got a lot of press out of it. So the $245 worth of books that they took off the collection resulted in $30,000 worth of donations. So spectacularly backfired. But this was what really our foundation then said, wait a minute, we've got, this is something that people care about.
There's a there there.
There's a there there, right? This is something that people care about, and that, we were getting donations from Thailand. Right. From across the country. It was phenomenal. And it was, I think it really got, people were sending Amazon boxes. The branch had Amazon boxes, like 100 of them stacked up. Mm-hmm. People donating on behalf of the woman who took the book. I would like to make this, like right. Somebody made a donation, but in your name. But it was. And then they happened to go to and talked about and learned about books unbanned, came back to me, and for me it was a no-brainer. Yeah. Absolutely no-brainer. Right. But we, Skye said, we have a little bit of more of a funding challenge in that we do not have the healthiest book budget in San Diego that a lot of other locations. To give you a comparison, the county has about a $7 million book budget.
And
County
by
of San
that, she means
Diego.
San Diego County.
San Diego County, not LA County.
Yeah.
San Diego County has about a $7 million book budget, and my book budget is $3 million for 2 million people.
Yeah.
For 2 million people, so not a healthy book budget. So we really had to make a business decision to make sure that we weren't going to deprive our patrons of ebooks, and so that's why we created a curated collection, and our foundation completely funded it, 100%. It's 100% donor funded. For every book that we put into the collection, they also purchased 2 copies to put into our permanent collection. So supplementing our own collection as well. But it's been, and then they did targeted marketing, right? They have a marketing firm who did targeted marketing in Florida, Texas, Alabama, Tennessee.
That's great.
Yeah, so did a lot of, so it's been.
Yeah, we were a little skittish about like going out like in Brooklyn, coming down to Texas saying,
Yeah.
donate to Brooklyn Public Library, but I'm glad that you all can do that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting about the funding, like we too are all privately funded. And we were very careful. Our city funds our book budget, which is a little north of $10 million, but that's for 2.7 million people. So it's still very inadequate, I would say, for the amount of readers that we have in Brooklyn. But we couldn't touch that. We wanted to make sure that we were crossing all of our T's and dotting our I's, and we just put the call out. We didn't really know what the response was going to be, much like you. I mean, there are people writing to us from all over the United States, people who haven't been to a library since they were kids. But they understand that the attack on a public library is an attack on sort of like how they think that their community should be constructed. It's an attack on democratic institutions. It's an attack on sort of like how we want to live. And this is like the attack that they were not going to, stand by for. Where do I write the check? So we were getting a lot of people coming in, and those are sort of the audience members that we are sort of like seeking, the ones who understand the democratic institutions, like underneath all of it. The educational gag orders, the anti-CRT bills, the attack on libraries and schools, like all of that is really sort of an attack on sort of like writ large democratic institutions and sort of like changing those in very fundamental and very radical ways. So I think that was sort of like the interest that drew a lot of people to fund our programs and these efforts. Like, sure, I'll write a check for like $50 to give a kid in Oklahoma a public library card so they can read whatever they want to. It's a narrative that sort of like makes sense for people, and particularly like coming out of COVID too, where I'm talking to some friends here who had the same kind of shift in sort of what we were doing in libraries. It was sort of like triage, like every day. Our jobs shifted so much. We were doing everything that we could to stay connected with our communities and keep our staff safe. And we were just like yearning for something afterwards, like everyone was, to get back to the principled work of being in a public library, being a community anchor, and something like this, understanding that coming out of the pandemic, now we're being attacked now. That's very, very strange. Like we weren't expecting that. Like an institution like libraries, y'all love libraries. Like year over year, we are voted some of the most trusted institutions. We're like firefighters. So how are we being attacked? What is going on? We weren't prepared.
How are we the bad guys now, right? Yeah.
Right. So having some creative ways to sort of push back, and librarians, we'd like to. We do sort of like we like change, and we're social justice minded, but we do it surreptitiously mostly. We're not usually out in front, but this seemed a little bit different. So
then I think one of the things that I think most people understand, which is why this is so surprising, is that the libraries have been generally the place for conservative-minded people and progressive-minded people. And so it's never really come to a place where the very basic of who we are as an institution had been challenged. So I think that was a big surprise for many of us, and this was sort of the response. And I'll say for LA County, it was one of our elected officials who approached me and said, well, I see that Brooklyn is doing a great program. How come you're not doing it? And it's funding, really, is why we didn't do it. Because we also know that I think the first year you spent something like $100,000, or you had to purchase worth $100,000 worth of material. Is that correct?
But it wasn't. So again, to our delight and surprise and eternal sort of like hope in humanity, like we actually didn't have a whole lot of difficulty getting people to support that project. So
that's right.
We were, like I said, just a lot of individual donors from across the United States writing out a check for $50 to support someone in a different state to have access to books. So we Yeah, there was some outlay there.
Well,
so
but I guess my point is that we weren't sure that we were going to have the same support because we
Yeah.
live in Los Angeles County. We're progressive for the most
Yeah.
part, and
Yeah.
it was never our issue. It was really sort of the thought
yeah.
as to why we didn't move on it right away. But we did end up raising funds just like Brooklyn, just like Seattle and San Diego. So we have been able to sort of push the agenda and make our collections available for young people primarily, but people in general, because there are lots of places in the United States who just don't have the budget. You've heard Misty even talk about her very anemic book budget, if I might. There are lots of library systems like that around the country, and so there's this way that we can really sort of foster this universal collection, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So it does sound political. Do you think that libraries are political? Do you think that this was a political move or a political response to a political action?
I don't. And I want to clear something up because there's this perception that libraries are supposed to be neutral. We are not neutral, right? We're not. When it comes to your basic rights, when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to social justice, when it comes to intellectual freedom, we are not neutral. We are, in fact, I tell everybody, this is a hill I will die on, is protecting people's right to access to information and to access, to read whatever you want and to make your own decisions. And I think in that sense, I think in this landscape, we've been forced into it seeming that we're being political. Right. But I'm gonna tell you, we have a bookstore in our library, and there was a very conservative, this has been years ago, but it was someone who was making very disparaging remarks about women and LGBTQ plus communities, and they had written a book, and our bookstore came and said, we're not going to carry it. Will you make a pledge not to carry it as well? And I said, no, we won't make that pledge. Right? Because that is what intellectual freedom is, and that's what the right to read is that you can read anything that you want to. I may not agree with it, I may not read it, but it doesn't mean you don't have the right to read it. And I think that's the problem. Mm-hmm. That is the whole problem. It is not a, I don't want, I want to make this decision for you, but don't make this decision for me. And that's where, we've been forced. And I laugh when people say, when did the library become woke? And I'm like, when was the last time you went in a library? Because we've always been woke. I mean, if being empathetic and caring about people is woke, then,
That's exactly right. And so what Misty is really getting at is that those of us who are in the field, our job is to ensure that there's representation of whatever you're interested in. And so sometimes those representations are more conservative, and sometimes they're more progressive, and sometimes they're right in the middle of the line. But we have to fight for your right to read whatever it is that you deem fit. And we remove ourselves from that conversation. So when people talk about the current banned book movement and libraries being woke, I really hate that word. Yeah. I hate what it's become because it's so not even accurate, for one, and it's just misplaced. But because of this current environment, we've had to step into ourselves as professionals to ensure that everyone is represented, everyone's story is represented. I often say that my job is not the director of the library, but my job is the keeper of stories. Mm-hmm. That is the work that I do. My job is to ensure that each of you have your story represented and that you can get it and access it for free. It's really just that simple. So I think that, with this whole idea that's happening, this whole conversation that's happening on banned books, you already spoke on the neutrality, so thank you for that. But from your perspective, Nick, you've talked about like the donors just jumping on board. Do you see a place for donors and people who love libraries and advocates and writers and readers? What do you see their role in this conversation?
So democracy is practice. It's not something that you just sort of like believe in and
I'm
have a
taking that one,
commitment.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, you're talking about sort of like what makes libraries so special. It's not like a political sort of like animal, really. It's sort of like, there's certainly a lot of like personal stories of libraries. Like everyone in this room has a library origin story, and they're fascinating. It's sort of like how you fell in love with like reading and fell in love, like understood sort of like yourself a little bit more. But there's another piece of it. It's sort of like like libraries are a site upon which democracy can be practiced, and that's very important. It's not, I don't know, like Eric Kleinenberg, who's coming out with a new book, sociologist from New York, wrote Palace for the People. He's like a library folk hero. But he's coming out with this beautiful new book. I read an advance copy. You should get it in February. It's called 2020. It was the first year of the pandemic. He was in New York sort of like looking around and telling stories about people who were living in the 5 boroughs. And like a theme of all of his work is like this, and he's more eloquent than I am about this, but it's sort of something like, social cohesion sort of evolves from frequent human interaction and sort of like shared sort of like engagement on like communal projects. And it's insufficient just to sort of have like a commitment to some sort of idealistic beliefs and principles. You have to go and do stuff. You have to be in front of people. You have to look them in the eye. And a library is a site upon which, it's a beautiful space. It's like a site where everyone is invited to participate. Everyone has shared ownership of the things that they find there. And I think when I'm thinking more sort of like idealistically, I'm thinking of, library isn't really necessarily a political, we are a political arm of government. As long as we're being funded by like our city government, we are a representation of their values, for sure. We hand out books for free. We've eliminated fines in many cases. Those are choices. They're political. They're for the people. But the space is really important. Like, how rare is it for people of all walks of life, people with different backgrounds, people you'd never had an opportunity to talk to in your life, and all of a sudden you're there, sort of like shoulder to shoulder with people. And if we're doing our work right, it's a place where people can find the resources on the shelves and sort of understand a little bit more about their worlds. Perhaps even like systems that are kind of unjust, right, that they're sort of ensnared in. And if we're doing our jobs really well, then perhaps they'll start thinking about how to like think critically about those systems. And then they'll look around, there are other people who are doing the same thing. And that's, I think, we shouldn't be ashamed of it. We should lean into that. These are sites where community happens. These are sites where community can be built. And if that's political, that's political. But it's social cohesion. It's how we, as a democratic, a very rare sort of pluralistic society, that's where we thrive. So I think that's. What was your question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
It's like picked up another thread. So,
we wish that's what politics was.
Listen,
right?
so like the
Yeah.
funding, right? And I think that's why people recognize it, because they feel it. Again, people who haven't been to a library in years, they're like, yeah, right on. My granddad from Kirksville, Missouri, he wouldn't even walk by a library. I mean, he lives in this small town. He's never been in the library, but he is very proud of the work that we're doing because he understands that there's something at risk. And what's at risk is really sort of our stories, our experiences, sort of our collective will to build the world that we want to build.
I think that's such a good point because my mother is very conservative, very religious, lives in Alabama, has all of her life. I'm a little kind of the black sheep of the family. And she is also the red leopard printed sheep of the family. And she is also very proud of what we're doing, right? So this is not the intellectual freedom and this is not a political issue.
Right.
This is both sides. This is you have people who are Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, whatever, that do not agree with limiting access to information. And what is shocking, and you may know this, is that the majority of the book banning that is going on, 1,100 books, 12 people. 12 people.
Oh, I didn't have that stat.
Yes.
Wow.
There's been, it's 12 people that are, really, it's a very, very small group of people that are doing these challenges. And it's very well orchestrated. It's very well funded. It's and unfortunately, I think it caught us a little off guard. Like you said, it was like, how did we suddenly become the bad guys?
That's right.
In this, and so, but it's not book banning is not a popular.
No, and by
Science,
the
right?
bad guy, I think Misty is really tapping into things. Again, so those of you who are not from the field, people who are within the library field, they have been threatened,
Yeah.
they have been fired, they have been harassed, they have to leave their jobs in some cases because of the onslaught of the attack. And so that's partially what I mean by we've never seen this well-organized, well-oiled machine like we've seen in this last couple of years. I mean, I think, I've been in the field professionally for over 20 years, and I have never seen my colleagues be afraid for their lives. That's not an exaggeration, and that's not necessarily to say in California. I can't really speak on it. It's not happening as much in Los Angeles County, but it is happening just south of LA County. But friends of mine, colleagues of mine who are in the Middle West, who are in the South, they're afraid to walk to their cars because they're being attacked. So this is something I don't want to minimize, because it's not simply just intellectual freedom and our belief in public libraries. Is our livelihoods and our lives are being threatened in some cases. And so that's not being spoken about enough. It's like a doctor. I equate that to a doctor having his or her life threatened who may work in a clinic for, reproductive rights. So it's getting to a place like that, which is time for us all to sort of ring the alarm. I can't quite see around your foot there, Nick.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I got 14 minutes. Okay, so let me move. I keep kind of doing this number. He's got a big foot.
I do.
Let's talk a little bit about,
I put it in my mouth a lot.
What's that?
I put it in my mouth a lot, is what my wife says.
But you haven't thus far, so we're almost done. Let's see if we can get to the next 10 minutes. I was looking at our missions, and just to quote some parts of each of our missions. So for San Diego, the city of San Diego, to inspire lifelong learning through connection to knowledge and to each other. I love that part. A part of Brooklyn's is to provide the people of Brooklyn with free and open access to information and education. And then for our mission, we kind of made a statement with the mission. The library belongs to its community, and it serves as a portal to learn, grow, and succeed. So when you hear those mission statements, I think it's really fair to say that none of us are overly progressive, but this work that we're doing is trying to live within the mission of our institutions, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it really is. At the very base of it, we want, as libraries, for people to be able to live their best life.
That's right.
That's really all we want. We want people to be able to live their best life. We want you to have access to information. We want to reduce the barriers to that. We want, we want to help. And it's, it's hard to go to work when that's your mission, is to try to better your community, and you're getting attacked for that.
Yeah, to be able to try and uplift your community.
Right.
And whichever ways that they need. I think my mic is coming in and out. I want to talk a little bit about this idea that we haven't surfaced enough. This idea of essentially creating what Nick has done and first initiated is this idea of a shared collection. So he's already spoken on it, that we each live in our own jurisdictions. We're typically funded locally by local tax dollars, and so there's some restrictions around how to access or have access to collections. But what he's done with this program, and the royal he, Brooklyn Public, not Nick himself, although maybe he'll take that one.
I'm not. No, there's like a huge, this is one of the most sort of coordinated efforts. I've been in libraries for 18 years. This took everyone's efforts. Everyone sort of latched onto it the moment that the idea had some traction. And again, much like people who are funding the program, our staff was really supportive of it. It was sort of like one of those things right after the pandemic, again, we were looking for something that could galvanize sort of energy, and this was it. Yeah.
So we are maybe the directors, but we're speaking on behalf of really powerful teams, people who believe this work to their core, who give everything. They leave nothing on the table at 5 or 6 or sometimes 8 p.m. when they get off. They give everything. So I just want to make sure that we take that opportunity to recognize our teams who really are the frontline people who do the work. But that's, so I want to kind of segue to this very brief conversation about this idea of a national collection. So some of you might be familiar with DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America, is that what it's called? Yeah. And so I think that its goal is kind of centered around this, but can you talk about like any comment on how we've been able to really sort of level the playing field in a lot of ways by creating these national, for the two of you, these national collections?
Yeah, I would say first off that it's insufficient. I think that the idea here is to, if there's any action that can be taken, it's to really support your public institutions, including public libraries. As long as there's a space where the free exchange of ideas can happen in a space that's shared by everyone, then there's a hopeful future, I would say, without being so Pollyannish about it. But like that's what it is. So for us to come in, and this is a risk that we took when we first started the program, was like, we are not the nation's library. We are Brooklyn Public Library. We have a particular group of people, like 2.7 million people in Brooklyn that are our constituents. We wanted to make sure that we had partners to come in and help support it, because it was unsustainable. We wouldn't be able to like do this forever. And we wanted other partners to step up in a principled way to say that, yes, we support this effort and we support the right to read anything that you want for everyone. But what we'd love to have, we'd love to build on the inherited goodwill, let's put it that way, that we've experienced over the years, and make sure people are refocusing their attention on institutions, public institutions like public libraries, and sort of understand sort of like the meaning of them and what they mean for their communities. I think it's happening. There's a lot to be sort of like fearful of in this world, but there's also a lot to be hopeful for. And I think that I've seen it. I know that you all have seen it. I've been in libraries, again, I said it again, like in 18 years, and I've never experienced the amount of genuine, authentic sort of support for a public library than I have over the last year or two.
Yeah,
that's
right. People are really turning into sort of like what these are, and it could be just like a younger generation even, sort of like going back to material culture and understanding public spaces as something important to their communities. Whatever it is, like I'm really happy about it. I know that we've been working our tails off, and our teams are doing everything that they can. During the pandemic, we were out there, we're spinning up a lot of different programs, things like that, so we've earned it. But now it's time to sort of like bring it into the future and nurture it and grow it, and that's what like we're doing. And I don't think that like this is sort of like an emergency room visit, right? Books Unbanned is sending out a library card for a kid in Mississippi who had like half the shelves in their library sort of decimated. Okay, that's an emergency room visit, and we're happy to do it, and we need to do it. We need other institutions to step up and support. But what we really need to do is like change, this is like a public health lens, like change the conditions around
that.
It's like
Books Unbanned is the intervention, but we need a prevention.
And just sort of like changing the culture around like what's happening in our communities.
I think it's also what I love about it, and one of the reasons why we got involved is I think it is also a way to make sure that people understand that this is happening. And that you need to pay attention to what's happening. And that is, for me, that's kind of the bigger part of it. It's providing the access, but it's also, saying, okay, you need to pay attention because this could happen in your community.
Right.
Because to say that, yes, we live in California, and you don't think it's going to happen here, but I can tell you in San Diego, right across the bridge in Coronado, it's happening.
Right below LA County,
it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening in Orange County. It's happening, So you have where they are pulling books, where they are, threatening library staff, and it's, and for me, it's been, I have a colleague of mine who said, now I have to go to every school board meeting because now we have people running for the board that want to remove the books out of that school, and she's like, I've never had to like attend every single school board meeting now, but now I have to.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I think that's for us too. It's also raising, like you said, raising the alarm.
Yeah.
There's
a quote, and the library lovers can help me identify who said it, that every great library has something in it to offend someone or something like that.
Yeah.
Who is that? Okay, I'll test you later.
It was me.
That was Misty.
It was me.
Joe is,
She's
the
a
name
lot.
Joe
offend.
is kind of.
Yeah,
centered.
every library has something that's going to offend.
Yeah, that's right.
Someone. And a lot of the comments we got, when we were, people were like, I can't believe you're like, what are you going to offer people next? Mein Kampf. And I'm like, well,
Actually, it's on our shelves.
actually we have,
I think
or-
most
yeah.
libraries have it.
Yeah.
We do. We
Yeah.
have several copies of
Yeah.
it, in fact.
So,
So, we have about 5 minutes, and I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity for anyone to ask a panelist a question. And when you ask the question, I'll be sure to repeat it for those in the back. Right here. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, I couldn't be more supportive of being able to get books like this, and it's so important. But where do you draw the line on what books you can't have for pornographic or whatever? What is that defining line?
So her question is what is the defining line between literature and what might be deemed pornographic? Who wants to take that?
I can take it. I can start,
Yeah.
and then I'll let
Missy
you.
can start,
So,
30 seconds.
It's, okay, so it's also subjective, right? So who makes that decision, right? I don't make that decision for you, right? Because I feel like for everyone, and we say this about books, and, a parent has a right to choose what books their child has access to.
That's right.
I don't have the right to make that decision.
That's right.
So there is that, we have to, just like Skye said, remove ourselves from that and trust and know that the user knows best.
And not only that, just to add to what she's saying, we have professional
Yes.
collection development teams.
Yeah.
There are people who go to school for this. There are people who read every review. There is a team of professionals building our collection. No library, to my knowledge, has every book ever written. And I don't even think the Library of Congress does, but don't quote me on that one. But there are people behind the decision making, and they decide what is most appropriate or right for their community. So I want to just center the professionals once again, because I don't want that to be minimized.
And we all have policies. We also have collection
That's right.
development
And anyone
policies.
who, you can challenge a book.
Yeah.
And for most of us, we have a team who sits down, reads the book, discuss the book, and then determine whether or not the book is for this collection or not for this collection. And there are times that we have gotten rid of books. We have decided that it's no longer appropriate for the collection or the time. So there are moments that we do actually get rid of some books that just don't work. But there's a whole process involved in that. So I want to be clear. So I was going to say really quickly, took my daughter, I have an 8-year-old, well, she's 9 now. I took her to one of my favorite bookstores in LA, and we were looking at books, and it was a Shel Silverstein book. And I was like, oh, I love Shel Silverstein.
Yeah.
And she's looking at it kind of in horror. And I walk over to her, and lo and behold, is one of Shel Silverstein's adult illustrated books with everything you can imagine. But because they're, I'm not hitting on people who work in bookstores, but because they are not professionals, they didn't know. They thought Shel Silverstein pictures, they put it in the children's area, and it was not for the children. So I just want to say,
And we've had that happen in libraries too. So that it's
exactly
not, yes,
that.
we've had that, yes.
So again, it's like understanding where contextualizing
Yes.
the collection. Let me get here to this lady in blue, ma'am.
Thank you. Where, in the digital world, where does age-appropriate checking out happen?
So she's saying in the digital world, where does age-appropriate checkout happen?
Yeah.
So most of us have cards that are delineated by age, 12 and under as an example, and generally those young people don't have access to material that would be deemed for teen and above.
It's a fascinating question, right? So, I mean, part of like Books Unbanned when we started spinning up Books Unbanned was this question about library card policy and membership policies is all over the map. There are people who have, like Skye was saying, like age-appropriate cards or whatever. Some people, like Brooklyn, we're a little bit more lenient on sort of like where kids can check out and that sort of thing. A parent does have a right to sign their name on the card, and there's restrictions there or whatever, but it's the parent's choice. parents' choice. But we wanted to figure out sort of like, what other library systems in the country are doing, and sort of what do we mean by access? We mean access. Is access just for a certain age group, like full access? Are there restrictions on children's material? And what does the American Library Association come down on? And they come down on, like, we don't have any, like a kid can walk into a library. My own library origin story includes Stephen King books that I was reading when I was 10, right?
Jackie Collins.
And
went in-
Rice.
12 years
Right.
old, Jackie Collins.
But so I would say that there's sort of all over the map, like where libraries sort of land on the issue. The American Library Association is fairly clear, the professional organization that guides us and gives us sort of like lodestars, that children can have access as long as they're walking through the space. And we look at the digital kind of realm as sort of like a similar space to the public library. I mean, if a kid wanders into the adult section and picks up, I don't know,
Jackie Collins.
Jackie Collins.
Kama
Okay,
Sutra.
so we are not going to prevent that kid from reading that book, particularly if they're in the. I mean, it's.
But it's also jurisdictional because we will in LA County
Yeah.
because we comply with SEPA, Child Internet Protection
But that-
Act.
yeah.
We also have a local ordinance based on our Board of Supervisors
Yeah.
that prevent this sort of action. So it really is jurisdictional.
Yeah.
All due respect. So it's not like I don't think with access to a library collection, physical collection.
And I
that's
gotta cut
not-
you off, so
all right,
wrap it
okay,
up,
so
please.
yeah, we also comply with SEPA and
It's
all
a
that kind of
difficult,
thing.
yeah, it's a,
But to answer your question, it is like every library has its own interpretation of it, and I think that it's high time that we actually have some study, like we actually dive in and
And so what
understand.
I have to end. They made me promise to end on time. Oh, he's saying keep going? Oh, he said wrap
He
it
said
up.
yeah,
Like
wrap it
this.
up, be done.
We-
It's
Like
no,
this,
We
we're like,
will
oh,
be
oh,
in the
oh.
hallway if you want to have a conversation, more
Yeah.
of a conversation. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us.